In this chapter, we'll make a shader for the tire. So let's switch the editor on the right back to the shader editor. And let's give the tire a new material, and we'll call it tire. Alright, now the plan is to have a couple layers on here. And in general, this will just be a rubber material, but still have a little shine to it. And we're going to give it sort of a radial, swirly type texture on the side of it, just for a cool extra detail and some variation to the rubber. And we'll also give it some rough patches of noise that we'll use for a light bump map. And another thing we're going to do is isolate the inside of the treads, and we're going to make that less shiny since this is where dust and dirt would accumulate. And we'll also add some dust on the surface of the treads too, since that's what you're driving on and they're going to get dirty. And then of course we have an image texture to put on the sidewall of the tire as well. And to start things off, let's make the swirly details. And this will be pretty similar to the brake disc where we used a sphere gradient to swirl a noise texture in a circle. So again, just like with the brake disc, make sure your object origin is in the very center of the tire. That's going to be critical for the sphere gradient to work right. Alright, so let's start by adding in a noise texture. Let's press Shift and A, and from the texture menu, add in a noise texture. I'll drop this over here, leaving us some room over here. And I'll press Ctrl and T to add some extra nodes to it. We don't need the mapping node, so I'll select this and press X to delete it. And then connect the object coordinates to the vector socket of the noise. And now let's go over here, and I'll switch over to Material Preview. And let's hold Ctrl and Shift and left click on this to preview it. And now let's turn the scale up to 75 so we can see more of it. And right now the noise is kind of smooth, so let's increase the detail up to 10 so it's a little bit grittier. And I need more of a swirliness to it, so let's also increase the distortion up to 1. Alright, that looks pretty good, but I do want it to swirl around the tire more, so just like with the brake disc, we'll alter the object coordinates by mixing it with a sphere gradient. So let me move this over here so we have some extra room, and let's press Shift and A, and from the texture menu, add a gradient texture and drop it on this line so it connects. And let's also change the type to spherical. And you can see it's stretching it in a circle for us, but it's stretching in a perfect circle when I just want it to be a little more swirly. So let's mix in more of the original object coordinates with it. So let's move this down a little, and let's press Shift and A, and from the color menu, add a mix color node and drop it on this line here so it connects. And now let's connect the object coordinates to the A field and connect the gradient texture to the B field. Now if we increase the factor up to 1, it's just showing us the spherical gradient, which is giving us that perfect stretch in a circle. But let's bring the factor down to 0.9 so it mixes in some of the original object coordinates and gives us just more of a swirly texture going around the side of it. And that looks exactly like I wanted it to, and we're good to go. Alright, now let's have this swirl affect both the color and the roughness values of the principled node. But first, let's add a little contrast to it with a color ramp node. More contrast will make the effect stand out more. So let's go over here to the end of the noise texture, press Shift and A, and from the converter menu, add a color ramp and drop it on this line. And now with the black color stop selected, let's click on the position here and change it to 0.2. And click on the white color stop and change this position to 0.75. That'll bring them both closer, and it adds more contrast to it, and that should be good. Alright, now we want the main color of the tire to be black, so let's mix this color in with black using a mix color node. So let me zoom out and I'll move these over. And let's press Shift and A, and from the color menu, add a mix color and drop it on this line. And now let's set the bottom color to black. And now we can control how much of this color gets mixed in with this slider. And I'm going to set this to 0.995, just so it's only a little bit visible. Alright, and now let's plug this in as the base color for the principled node, and let's hold Control and Shift and left click on this to plug it back in. And it looks pretty good. I'm a bit distracted by how bubbly everything is, so let me turn on the bevel modifier and the subsurf modifier as well for a better preview. And there we go. Alright, so you can see that extra color there, and it's subtle, which is perfect. We don't want these details to stand out too much, and I think this is good. And next up, we'll have this affect the roughness value as well, so the darker areas are shinier. I guess the idea here is that the darker areas are maybe a little bit greasier, so they'll be darker in color and shinier as well. For this, we'll run our swirl texture through a map range node to change the minimum and maximum values to get the roughness just right. So let me zoom out, and let's press Shift and A, and from the converter menu, add a map range node and drop it right here. And now let's connect our color ramp here to the top value of the map range node, and let's preview this. Now, we don't want to leave this as black and white and use it as a roughness map, because then the white areas are going to be too rough and they won't be shiny enough, and the black areas will be too shiny. So we need to dial in the perfect minimum and the perfect maximum roughness using the map range node here. So let's have it convert a range of 0 to 1 to a range of 0.35 as the minimum and 0.5 as the maximum. So now the roughness won't be lower than 0.35 and it won't be higher than 0.5. All right, so let's plug this in to the roughness socket of the principled node, and let's plug this back in and let's check it out. All right, cool. We might tweak this later on once we start mixing things together, but this looks good for now. All right, now let's add in our tire sidewall texture. I do want to add more layers to this, but I'm anxious to add the sidewall in, so let's do that. So let me zoom out, and I'll press Shift and A, and from the texture menu, add in an image texture. And I'll drop this over here. Now by default, image textures use UV coordinates, so we don't need to connect any texture coordinates to this. And now let's click on Open and navigate to your project files, go to the Textures folder, and load in Tire Sidewall. And now let's hold Control and Shift and left click on it to preview it. And this is almost perfect, but it's upside down. And we'll fix this in a minute, but first I want to make sure that your tire is gray like mine is. And if it's not, then go up into the UV editor over here, and let's tab into edit mode of our tire. And to make sure the UVs move faster for us, I'm going to disable subsurf and bevel visibility for right now. And now let me zoom out, and I'll go down here to where we have the UVs for the rest of the tire that we scaled down to a single point. And just make sure these are on a blank gray space on the texture map. The gray areas on this texture are a neutral value of 0.5, and that means when we use this as a height map for the bump node, these areas won't bump up or down. They'll just stay the same. And that's what we want for the rest of the tire. So make sure the rest of the tire is this neutral gray color. All right, and now we need to flip this upside down. So let me tab back in, and we don't really need to flip it. We just need to rotate it 180 degrees. So I have the other tire UVs selected, so I'll just press Ctrl and I to invert the selection and select just the tire sidewall. Then press R to rotate and type in 180 and press Enter. And that does the trick. All right, now let's switch back to the shader editor and let's see what's next. I think it's time to set this up as a normal map. So for that, we'll need a bump node. So let's press Shift and A, and from the vector menu, add in a bump node. And let's connect this color to the height input here. And I'll drag this over here. And let's connect the bump node to the normal input of the principled node and plug this back in. All right, so this is working, but it's looking a bit too strong. So let me bring the distance here down to 0.0006. And that should be good. And let me turn on the bevel and subsurf modifiers to get a better preview. And this looks good, except it created a problem down here. You can see where it changes direction. And that's because the subsurf modifier is just smoothing out this bevel right here too much. And it's messing with the shape of this area. And the only way to fix this is to add an extra control loop really close to this bevel right here. So let me turn off subsurf and bevel so I can edit faster. Then tab in. And let's press Ctrl and R through here to add a loop cut. Add this in and drag it closer to that beveled edge right there. Don't move it too close because then it's going to trigger that clamp overlap on the corner and we won't get the kind of bevel we want. And that should be close enough. So let me tab out and I'll turn back on bevel and subsurf. And that looks perfect. All right, cool. All right, now the next issue we have is these extra lines at the bottom of the sidewall. This is happening because the UVs down here are too close to the edge, and it's starting to repeat the top of the texture. So to get rid of these extra lines right here, we just need to tell the texture not to repeat. So let's go over to the image texture and change repeat to clip. and that takes care of that problem. And now the last issue is if you zoom in close enough, everything looks really pixelated, and that's because the image interpolation is set to linear. So let's switch this over to cubic, which will kind of blur it for us and just make everything look perfect. Alright, so that does it for the sidewall texture. And now let's add another layer of detail, a more gritty layer this time, and for that we'll use a Musgrave texture. So let me zoom out, and let me bring the image texture closer to the bump node, and I'll move these down and out of the way, and we'll work in this area here. So let me press Shift and A, and from the texture menu, add in a Musgrave texture. And we're going to give this object coordinates as well, so plug that into the vector socket, and let's hold Control and Shift and left click on this to preview it. Now I kind of forget what all of these different fields do, and I usually just play around with them until I get something looking right, so follow my lead. Let's change detail up to 16, and dimension down to 0, and luminarity to 2.8. And this is going to be our gritty layer. Now I want to mix this with the roughness map, but I don't think I want to add this to the color and make it actually look dirty. I just want it to look a little roughed up. So I'll just use it to affect how shiny the surface is here and there. Alright, so now what I'll do is mix this Musgrave texture with our original roughness map here. And I only want the brighter values here to be added to our roughness map. So let me move all these over so we have some extra space. And I'll hold Control and Shift, right click on the Musgrave texture and drag it up to this map range node to mix them together. And let's hold Control and Shift and click on this to preview it. Now, like I said, I only wanted to add the brighter spots to our roughness map, so let's switch the mix operation here to lighten. And now if I set the factor down to 0, it just shows us the original roughness map, and as I increase this, it adds more and more roughness. But let's set this to 0.2 to just add a little bit of extra rough spots. Alright, and now let's plug the principled node back in to see how it looks, and there we go. Now I'd also like this layer of grit to affect the normal map, so we need to combine the Musgrave texture and the tire sidewall texture before they reach the bump node. So let me move these up here, and let's drag the bump node over so we have some extra space here. And now let's press Shift and A, and from the color menu, add a mix color node and drop it on this line. And now let's connect our Musgrave texture to the bottom color socket here, and let's switch the mix type here to soft light. You could probably mix it a bunch of different ways, but I thought this one worked out the best. And we'll decrease the factor down to 0.01 for a really subtle bump. And you can see that texture as you zoom in closer. Alright, and that will do it, and this is looking pretty good so far. Alright, now the next step will be to isolate the top of the treads so that we can make them a little dirtier and less reflective. And we can do this pretty easily using a sphere gradient. So let me zoom out, and I'll add this up here so we can more easily mix it in with our color map here. And I already have a sphere gradient texture over here, so I'll select this, press Shift and D to duplicate it, and move it up here. And let's give this object coordinates so that the spherical gradient originates from the origin in the middle of the tire. And here's what we're going to do. So the sphere gradient can be seen as maybe starting out as black in the middle, and then becoming whiter and whiter as we get further from the center. So that means the values along this circle right here should be a specific value that we should be able to pinpoint by using a map range node. So let me press Shift and A, and from the converter menu, add a map range node and drop it here. And let's connect this color to the top value here, and let's preview this. Alright, now we can't see anything quite yet because we need to fiddle with the values and add more contrast. So let me increase the from minimum here, and you can see this starting to show us this spherical gradient more. And I'm going to keep this set to 0.64 looks good. That takes us right up to the edge of the bottom of the treads. And I want to add more contrast though, so it's not quite a gradient here and we have a harder line. So let me bring from maximum down to, let's go with 0.65. That gives us a nice sharp line there. And now we're almost done isolating the treads, but you can see there's a white strip down the middle. And that's because since this is a spherical gradient, it's going to be shaped in a round way. So it's basically like the sphere is touching the sidewall here, then it's going up in a round way and it's not touching the corner, so the corner is black. But then it's going to come up and touch the middle, So the middle is going to be white, and then it comes down the other side. So what we need to do is, instead of having a sphere, we need to stretch this sphere on the x-axis infinitely so it becomes more like a cylinder. And to do that, we'll use a mapping node. So let's press Shift and A, and from the vector menu, add a mapping node and drop it on this line so it connects. And to stretch this out infinitely on the x-axis, we simply turn the x scale down to 0. And there we go. So now we have basically a cylinder gradient on our cylinder-shaped tire, and this is giving us the result we need. Except I do want to flip these colors because I like it when the areas that I want to focus on are brighter colors. So let me go over here to the map range node, and I'll swap the 2 minimum and 2 maximum. So I'll make 2 minimum 1 and 2 maximum 0. And that looks awesome. All right, now let's mix this with the color map. So let me take these 3 nodes and move them over on top of the color map here. And let me select this lighten node down here, press Shift and D to duplicate it and drag it on top of this line here. And now we're going to mix our tire color map with this light dust color here. And we'll use our map range node up here as the mix factor. So let's plug this map range node in as the mix factor here. Plug the principled node back in so we can see it all. And there we go. So now we can control the color of the dust just by changing the color of it right here. And we can just give it a regular dust color or even like a brown color if you rode through a construction site and the tires got a little dirty, and whatever you want to do. I'm going to leave mine set to gray and a value of maybe 0.1 for a more subtle dusting. You know what? Let's put it up to 0.2 so it's a little more noticeable. And that should be good. All right, not bad. Now there's just a couple more things to do. First, I want to get this new color here to affect the roughness map so it's not quite as shiny. And second, this is just too consistently gray. It doesn't look like dirt. It just looks like a lighter gray rubber. So we're going to add more of a noise texture to it as well. But first, let's work on the roughness map. And our tread mask already has white on the treads, which is perfect because that'll add a higher roughness value to our roughness map. So we just need to mix that in with our roughness map, which is coming from this node right here. So first, let me get a good angled shot like this so I can see the shiny surface. And now let's take this lighten node right here, press Shift and D to duplicate it and drop it on this line here so it connects. And now let's connect our tread mask from the map range node to the bottom color socket of this new lighten node. And we'll leave this set to lighten so that the tread mask can only add higher roughness values. That way it doesn't make anything shinier by accident. Alright, so now when the mix factor is set to 0, we have our original roughness map, so the surface of the treads is shiny again. And if we increase this to 1, you can see that it adds in more of the tread mask for higher roughness values, and the surface is totally dull. I'm going to leave this set to 0.9, just for a tiny bit of shine on the surface. Alright, so that's good to go, and now I want to make this a little grittier looking using a Musgrave texture. And we already have one down here that's pretty gritty looking already, so I'll select this and zoom out and press Shift and D to duplicate it, and let's move it up here. And let's connect the object coordinates to this as well, and let's preview this. So this is a bit too gritty looking maybe, so let me turn the dimension up to 0.1 just to soften it a little bit. Alright, now we can use this to darken our tread mask so that all the darker areas will just add some gritty patchiness to the treads. And we want to change the tread mask before it goes to our color map and our roughness map. So let's hold Shift and right click and drag through these lines here to add a reroute. And let's take all these nodes and move them over so we have a little extra space here after the map range node. And let's select the mix node down here, press Shift and D to duplicate it, and drop it on this line so it connects. Alright, and now let's grab our Musgrave texture and move it over, and I'll connect this to the bottom color socket of the mix node. And like I said, I wanted the dark patches here to darken our tread mask, so let's change the mix type here to darken. And now let's preview this, and now we can use the mix factor here to add in more or less grittiness. And I'm going to keep this set to 0.2. Alright, and that should do the trick. So let me hold Control and Shift and plug the principled node back in to check it out. And there we go. That looks much more natural and less like it's just a different colored rubber. Alright, cool. And we are actually done with this now. And this is looking pretty awesome, and I think it's going to look great on the car. And we do have a lot of things in here that can be tweaked, like the dust layer and stuff, but I don't think I'm going to add this to a node group, and I'll just go into the various nodes and change the parameters if needed when we get to the final renders. Alright, now there's just one more thing to do. We need to check this out on the car itself. So let me go back into global view, and that looks awesome. Let me just double check to make sure all the tires look okay, because I'm pretty sure they're going to be flipped on this side. Yeah, you can see that our tire sidewall texture is flipped over here on both of these tires, so we need to fix this now. And it's an easy fix, we just need an extra modifier. So let's select this tire, go over to the modifiers, and from the Edit tab, add in a UV warp modifier. And down in the transform options here, change the X scale to -1. And that'll flip it for us, and that's good to go. And let's do that for the back tire as well. Alright, and we are finished all of the tires. And they look pretty darn cool. And that actually finishes all of the hardest shaders as well, so the rest of this section just keeps getting easier, and that's it. So I'll see you in the next chapter.